We've had over 100 gospel conversations this month, and we've had 14 people trust Christ this past month.
Or more than 50% new conversion growth. So if they had 100 students, 50 of those were new believers that their ministry had led to the Lord.
Yeah. If we are not measuring success, then I would say we're probably not doing a great job of actually making disciples.
Yeah. Isn't it legalistic to measure kingdom success?
If it was, then the book of Acts has it wrong. Even in the book of Acts, they knew how many new believers they had.
I mean, there was like 300 or 400 people in there, but I was like, I don't even know if these kids are believers. Like
white ping pong balls and orange ping pong balls. And we have a huge banner right behind it that says, if you shared the gospel with somebody, put a white ping pong ball in for each time you share the gospel. If you share the gospel with somebody and they trusted Christ, put an orange ping pong ball on reasons. Yeah. And so we want to measure things that can't be fake.
The vibe in the room was amazing.
Welcome
to another episode of Beyond the Youth Room podcast. We are your hosts, Keith and Ryne, and today we're going to be talking about how to measure success beyond just numerical attendance for your youth ministry. So stay tuned today as we unpack some of the healthy metrics that we see in youth ministry today and how you can track those as well. So stay tuned. Now, Ryne, you have been doing youth ministry for how many years now?
This is year 6.
Year 6, okay. And I've been doing youth ministry. Why am I looking at you for that answer?
Is it 20?
Probably. I mean, it's kind of hard because I started as a teenager, like really living out ministry, like, and that's what got my feet wet with youth ministry. Within college, I was a part-time youth pastor, even while I was still in Bible college, studying youth ministry, and then so I guess like officially like since 2006. So how many years is that?
18.
2005? Yeah, 2006. So
between the two of us, we have like
25 years.
Yeah, there you go.
Like that, yeah.
Completely even
All right,
split.
So a quarter century of youth ministry between the two of us. That's how we should intro every
since the late
episode.
1900s.
Yeah,
We've been doing youth ministries
the late 1900s.
Which it wouldn't be true, but
yeah, because I came to Christ in 97. So yeah. So
I was born in 96.
We've been doing youth ministry. What? Are you serious?
Yeah, that's serious.
Oh my gosh. All right. If you are watching this or listening to this and you're born, if you weren't born before Y2K, that's possible because I'm sure there's youth leaders that are watching this that are less than 24 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. Seems weird to me.
If I live really long, I'll have a chance to see 3 centuries.
If you live really long, I mean, you have to live past 100.
Well, anybody would have to live past 100 to see 3 centuries, but
it's true.
Anyways,
okay.
Sorry.
All right, sidetrack. But you won't see the year 3000 though.
Jonas Brothers did. Yeah. They told me all about it.
All right, so we're going to be discussing what are some key metrics of success beyond just attendance.
Yes.
One of the gospel advancing ministry values that we've emphasized here so much is what?
Value 6, biblical outcomes measure it.
Biblical outcomes measure it. And so we're going to be unpacking what biblical outcomes should we measure and how do we do that? So one of the even rapid fire questions we're going to tackle a little bit later, if you stay till the end, is going to be how often and how do you track data in your youth ministry? Mm-hmm. And then we're also going to ask, isn't it legalistic to measure kingdom success?
Yeah.
So we're going to be tackling that, which, I won't get into the answer. The question alone is interesting to me.
But we've both gotten it.
We've both gotten it from different people.
And I think we should
very passionately, by the way.
Yes.
Too. People, yeah.
We'll get into why we think that is too. But I think we should start out by saying, okay, we're saying beyond attendance. Does that mean that
attendance
there's
doesn't
something
matter
wrong with tracking
yes.
attendance?
Oh yeah, of course. No. Attendance tracking, it should be like the bare minimum.
Yes.
So I mean, how many students you're having, but it's not even just about how many students total, but what students, like to know who was there and who wasn't. So we track numbers because numbers represent people. Mm-hmm. And so if we just count how many people are in the room, but we're not even sure who that was. So I would even take a step further, not just counting how many bodies are in the room.
Yes.
Or how many students and how many adults, but what students and what adults are there. And so through that too is like having a check-in process where you can actually tell who was there week to week, so that you can tell who wasn't there week to week so that you can follow up with them and shepherd them.
Well, and I think too, the reason why we want to go beyond attendance is on some levels, attendance can be faked. And this, not in the sense that like you're making up random numbers, but like
some ministries do.
We can get kids there for the wrong reasons. Yeah. And so we want to measure things that can't be faked. We want to measure things that, are between them and God, and we're just kind of on the outside looking in. But things like how many kids do we have, or how many did we have an event? Like those are things that we can have wrong motivations and get people there.
When you said that brought up my experience as a teenager. So I was trying to, share the gospel with my friends and live out the gospel, and I wasn't I didn't grow up in the church really. So when I became a Christ follower as a teenager, I was like, I'm just figuring this out. Like, I don't know what normal people do like that are in church, but I'm just telling everybody that I know that I care about the gospel and trying to live it out. And so I kept hearing about this youth ministry that was local that had like 300 or 400 students. Like it was, and I was like, man, this is amazing. Like, and so I had a friend that went to this church, and I asked her, I was like, hey, like, do you think I could come and check out your youth group just to see what it's like? And at this point I was attending another church. So, it wasn't like I was trying to find anyone. I was just like, it sounds amazing. Like that there's that many teenagers in this area that are like, living out the gospel. And so I went and attended, and I sat in the sermon that the youth pastor gave, and literally like everybody around me was just talking, like not just like whispering like back and forth, but like talking out loud while the youth pastor was, just having conversations, like not even listening to what he was saying. And I was just like looking around, and I'm like, it doesn't matter that there was like 300 or 400 people in there, but I was like, I don't even know if these kids are believers. Like, I don't know if they're, you know what I'm saying? So we bring this up because you can have a large attendance number and it not actually be furthering the gospel.
Yeah.
And I just remember how, even as a teenager, I remember how disappointed I was, that there was this many people at a youth ministry that wasn't really serious. Like, they weren't serious about their faith, or because they weren't even like listening to the message, or and so, I just remember that, like, it stuck with me because I was like, these guys aren't, like, they're just not even here for the right reasons, or and so with that, I think we can measure the wrong things. We can have like, quote, success on the numerical side without really measuring the right things that would show health. And so that's why we want to create this episode, and how to measure success beyond just attendance. What are some of the underlying things that we're going to cover here? A lot of this, it's not just based on like what we think. Like, we're talking, because the biblical outcomes value is based on biblical outcome. Like, what did the Bible measure? Like, what do we see in Scripture in the Book of Acts and the New Testament? How did they measure success? Like, what were some of the things that they reported on or like mentioned as markers of success? But also the command of the Great Commission, which is going to kind of fall under some of these things that we're going to talk about today. If you're unfamiliar with the Great Commission, do you know by heart?
Yes.
What is it?
Matthew 28:19 through 20. And all authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I'm with you always to the end of the age.
Boom. Yeah. We actually say it at the end of each of our services at our church. And it's just, So it's really encouraging because a lot of our students have memorized them just because with the repetition and so it's not a foreign thing to us. Like, we really want to emphasize that. And so with that, like, how do we measure success according to the Great Commission, and how we're following through with obedience to that? So number one on the how to measure success beyond attendance would be new conversion growth. So how many disciples are actually being made? Like, how many people are coming to Christ? Was that ever mentioned in Scripture, like in the Book of Acts?
So let me clarify again and then answer that. So new conversion growth, for some people, might be like, I don't know what that is. This is the amount of kids who have come to Christ through your ministry specifically, not because the street, the church down the street closed down, or because, we're inviting all of our Christian friends. We see it in the Book of Acts. We see and 3,000 were added to their number that day. Could you imagine that percentage of new conversion growth? The church in Jerusalem, in Acts chapter 2, and it says that Peter gives his sermon at Solomon's portico, and about 3,000 were baptized and added to their number daily. And so we see that, yes, even in the Book of Acts, they knew how many new believers they had. They even put a number on it, which is crazy. So yes, we see that absolutely biblical. So new conversion growth. Yeah. What? If we have, how do you know 5%, is that a good new what?
So part of the gospel advancing ministry values, so the book that Greg Stier wrote on, called Gospelize, which we've mentioned here, we kind of base our philosophy ministry off a lot of the stuff there. So back in the day when I was writing my master's thesis on teenage evangelism and why we're not seeing the results that we know we can have with teenagers in America, with sharing the gospel. I was talking at that point. I was familiar with Dare to Share, and I heard about this research project that they were doing, and was just talking with some of like with Greg Steger and some of his senior leaders at Dare to Share about being able to see the research. This is before the book came out. And what was fascinating about their research that they did, they started the research project just to see if their organization was being effective at training students on how to share the gospel and like how that unfolded long term, And so what that opened up though, they did like a control group of people that had never been to their conferences to learn how to share the gospel. They did, ministries that they talked with that had been to their conferences, and then they did questions and surveying with ministries that had been to their conferences, but then continued to train after the conferences and hold students accountable as a goal. And so the results of their ministries were drastically different. And then they were like, well, hold up. Like, what was different with some of these ministries that are really leading students to the Lord? Yeah. And so they developed another research project just focusing on these ministries that they had up to 50 or more than 50% new conversion growth. So if they had 100 students, 50 of those were new believers that their ministry had led to the Lord. Yeah. So they're like, hold up. What was different with your group versus the one that doesn't have any new conversion growth? Yeah. And then they started to see that these values were peppered in to, what you have, you see this in the book of Acts. It's not like a surprise or anything like that when you look at them, as far as like intercessory prayer and leaders modeling and bold vision and biblical outcomes, all these different things that were in these ministries that were present. But a new conversion growth, it really helps to see if your ministry is being effective at reaching non-believing students, not just transferring growth. So a healthy minimum is at least 10% of your ministry should be new conversion growth. There's some ministries that have 25 or even 50% of their ministries, which present new problems because you're like discipling new believers, and you need the infrastructure for that. Yeah. So it's not very healthy if you don't have any students that have come to Christ through your ministry. I would say that is a problem that needs to be addressed in ministry. And
that's not just 10% in the last year. That's just 10% who over the life of your ministry have trusted Christ.
And so how do you find out? Like, obviously if you have a group of 10 or 12 students, whatever, you can probably know them. Hopefully you know them well enough to know it's like, oh yeah, James came to Christ at our camp this summer, or, so-and-so led that, person to the Lord. But how can you track if you have a larger group that you don't know everybody, personally like that?
Yeah. So it depends how good of a memory you have sometimes too. There's been times where I've been able to just go through our roster and I just know, cause I remember when they trusted Christ, and it's like, not, I don't remember all the dates or anything like that, but that is a helpful thing to do. It's like, hey, celebrate that with them, and mark that down. But you can also just self-assess, and you can simply give a 1-question survey. It's like, did you come to Christ through our ministry or because of somebody in our ministry? Yes. Boom. So even it's just simple as that. You can give a 1-question survey to decide.
And we've done that too when we've done, which we're going to talk about, like our 4-chair surveys. We've actually, part of our 4-chair survey, we also include to ask about new conversion growth. So in the way that we've defined it, and it's just helpful knowledge, and it also like can really help to just encourage other people, is we give them some options, like where we say, did you come to Christ like through some of our student ministry, whether it was a camp, a person from our ministry sharing, a leader sharing with you, another student, whatever, one of our services, like all this different stuff. Or did you come to Christ, in our kids ministry at our church? Did you come to Christ through a parent or, grandparent or someone in your family leading you to the Lord, or, and then other, and then they can fill in the blank. But what we found was like, just to give some suggestions on that, like they're like, you can kind of see and then encourage your kids ministry leaders. It's like, hey, like, we have a good portion of our students that are serving, or, that are faithfully attending our student ministry that came to Christ through our kids ministry. Yeah. And then also you can kind of identify what students came to Christ through your, so just asking them if you're not sure. So just doing a poll or survey. So a new conversion growth should be a marker of success. So currently, and we're about to poll again as we start this new school year, but we have about 16% right now in our ministry that came to Christ through our ministry. Yeah. We have a pretty strong, group that came up, that have been raised in a Christian family. So their parents love the Lord, or they were with the Lord through our kids ministry. So with that though, we do have a 16% new conversion growth in our ministry currently, but we'll see what the numbers are too. That might have increased, throughout the this summer. So, okay, next one. This one's not necessarily an outcome, but it's an activity that we track usually that leads to outcomes. And so, just by an analogy, have you ever gardened before?
No.
Have you ever planted any plants?
No.
Nothing. Well, you don't have to be a gardener to know this principle.
Yes.
If you plant more seeds,
More crops.
do you ever get more crops? Like if you have a larger field and you plant more seeds in that field, do you get more crops?
Yes.
Yeah. So the principle is like obviously the parable of the good soil that we want to throw the gospel seed, like we want to to do that, and we're not sure the type of soil that'll land on, but typically like the more people you share the gospel with, if you're effective, like it should, if the Lord's working in their hearts, like they're gonna be saved. And so what we found is the more seeds that we plant, the more outcomes that we see, like the more crops that we see grow.
Yep.
And so one of the measures of success beyond attendance that we do is new conversion growth that we talked about within gospel conversations. So that's what we see as the seeds that we're planting, so that the gospel will grow in the hearts of students that can come to Christ.
Yeah.
And how do we track that? What do you do creatively to measure that? How do you actually know if students are having gospel conversations? Do you even know? Do you set an exam or like set a goal for that?
Yes.
What's your process?
Yeah. So we have a cross in the back of our youth room that somebody in our church made for us after I asked them to do it. And it's plexiglass on the front. And we have ping pong balls. We have white ping pong balls and orange ping pong balls. And we have a huge banner right behind it that says, if you shared the gospel with somebody, put a white ping pong ball in for each time you share the gospel. If you share the gospel with somebody and they trusted Christ, put an orange ping pong ball in. And so when you look at the cross, you'll see white ping pong balls and you'll see orange ping pong balls scattered throughout too. And so we don't have a time in our service where we say, hey, go stand up in front of everybody and we're all going to clap for you while you drop them in. No, it's just in the back of our youth room. But it's always the first thing kids see when they come in. And so it's a reminder for them to drop one in. And so like my wife and I were driving home last night and she was like, hey, did you see Josh put in 9 ping pong balls like last night? And so I was like, nope, had no clue, but it's like, so he shared the gospel 9 times, since the last youth gathering. And it's just like, hey, so you see that. And so it just sits back there. And then at the end of every month, I dump them all out into a bucket and I count them and I put them back in. And then once the cross is full, we dump them all out, but I keep track every month of how many. Nice. So we have a gospel. So last year we had a goal to share the gospel 500 times. We shared the gospel 563 times. This year we have a goal to share the gospel 2,000 times. And
it's a big jump.
It is. But I think the month of August, I counted before youth group last night, we had 89 gospel conversations. So
just in 1 month,
plus Josh's 9, there takes you 9. So we've had over 100 gospel conversations this month, and we've had 14 people trust Christ this past month. So we're going to, we have to really get more creative in order to hit the 2,000 mark, but already seeing that we've sown more seeds.
Yeah.
We've seen more.
So that's even like, that's more than 10%. Conversion rate as far as, 100 gospel conversations, 14 people. Yeah, that's amazing. And so you're on track. I mean, without increasing month over month, like you have, that's 1,200 if you can maintain that, so that, that's.
But that's without any of our kids launching their gospel movements yet.
I was just saying,
if you're wondering what that is about, go back and check out.
Episode.
Yep, 46, episode 46.
46, yes. All right, so gospel conversations, so we're doing the same thing. We haven't had a visual way of tracking them recently, and we're in the process of doing that. So we're having one of our parents in our student ministry build a kind of a box with a plexiglass front so that we can count that. But our goal is 2,000 gospel conversations as well. Not to copy you. But
we'll see who gets there.
Yeah, we'll see that. But I'd say like aim for the stars, and if you land on the moon, you still went further if you didn't aim at all.
Yep.
And so even if we don't hit that goal, like we want to pray for that, and we want to see the Lord work and be more effective at being vocal about our faith.
Yeah.
Okay, so new conversion growth, something you should be tracking. How many students have come to Christ as a result of your ministry? Gospel conversations, that's an activity, that leads to outcomes, Lord willing. And then what are some other things that we should track? So we see this in the Gospels, in the book of Acts as well. On almost immediately after people come to Christ, they are baptized.
Yes, sir.
And so we want to track baptism. Why is that important to track?
Well, it's interesting when we were putting it sorry, I just answered that as like, you don't know. I was like, well, actually, Keith, I was like,
Actually.
no, we were talking before when we actually came up with what we should track, and then we looked at the Great Commission. We were like, these line up perfectly with the Great Commission.
Yeah.
And so go and make disciples, new conversion, growth, gospel conversations, baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then the next one we'll get to measures how well we are teaching them to obey all that we've commanded.
Yeah.
So why should we track baptisms? Well, it's because we're making truly disciples, not converts. And so, baptism is when somebody, obviously they're saying, hey, look, this is what I believe. And
The public identification.
Correct. An outward, an outward picture of an inward decision. And so baptism, you have to really follow up with kids for baptism. Like, it is really because it's a big thing that I found too, where it's something that we actually want to work on, because there is a huge drop off in the amount of kids who trusted Christ versus the amount of gotten baptized. Now, every time we do a baptism in church, there's a ton of students getting baptized, but, it's a Sunday morning thing for us. And so we've even had to say, hey, is that what we want to keep doing? We did a baptism in a creek during youth group this past summer. But baptism kind of goes, hey, are we really helping them take that next step?
Creek near the church?
Yeah, we have a creek that runs right by our church. It was oddly warm, but we won't get into that. And a bunch of stuff grew. So it was more of like a stagnant part of what's supposed to be a creek. But anyways,
so we used to do years ago, and we stopped doing this for various reasons, but we had a beach camp that we did, and we would actually do baptisms on the beach, after someone gave their life to Christ. And the challenge with that is that you have, parents, after they get home, they're like, I wanted to be there. Or I wanted to see it. And we would record and stuff, but it wasn't the same. So we stopped doing that. But then we were actually talking about with our youth staff team coming out of camp, where we had students that were challenging to be baptized. That was actually one of the things that they can mark on their response card, was like, I'm interested in being baptized. And so even there's a drop off of students that are indicated that they're interested to ones that actually attend a baptism class or follow up with the right steps. So we were like, why don't we just have a baptism class at camp? Yeah. So that they're like, that's the main requirement. They learn about it, and then they set the date of when they get back home, like coordinate with their parents and stuff. So there's already a level of commitment already there before they even leave, while it's still in their mind. So that might be a great way to really just bring top of mind the importance of baptism through student ministry.
Absolutely.
So baptism's huge part of that public identification with being a follower of Christ.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we have new conversion growth, we have gospel conversations, we have baptisms, and then 4-chair scores. Now that, if you've never heard of that before, it's how many sets of 4 chairs do you have in your youth room?
It's actually the percentage of your high school guys who can carry 4 chairs at a time to impress their peers.
Not just their peers, other girls.
Well,
whoever carries the most chairs gets the most girls.
I think that is teaching them to obey.
4 chairs. If you're not familiar with the 4-chair discipleship model, let's unpack it a little bit. So we've even talked about this on the podcast. We've gone through a whole episode of just the 4 chairs before, but why don't you recap us for people that may have missed that?
Dan Spader's book, 4-Chair Discipling, What Jesus Calls Us to Do. He looked at the life of Christ and saw 4 challenges that Jesus issued to his disciples. So first was follow me. So when, Andrew and Peter wanted to know more, Jesus said, come and see. So first it's come and see, then follow me. Then I will make you fishers of men, and go and make disciples. And so chair 1 is somebody who is not a believer yet. They might have been in church their whole life. They might have just showed up, but they haven't made that decision to trust Christ yet. So they are a seeker. The challenge to them is come and see. Chair 2 is the believer. So they've made a decision to trust Christ, but they're still an infant in their spiritual walk. Again, could have been saved 20 years or saved yesterday, but they've never. It's still kind of a consumeristic. They constantly need to be fed. So to that person, it's follow me. Start to put these things into practice. The third challenge is I will make you fishers of men. And so these are the people who are starting to share their faith, and they are serving, the body of Christ. So the chair 3 worker, they are engaging in the Great Commission. And then chair 4, go and make disciples. This is somebody who is going back and training other people to go and make disciples. So chair 4 is a disciple maker. They are walking back and helping others come through. They are initiating relationships for the purpose of bringing these people along spiritually, and they're helping others see what it looks like to go and make disciples.
Yeah. So when you talk about 4-chair scores, it's a competition.
Yes. No,
No,
it's
4 chair scores are just the results, like the data
correct.
when you survey your students
Yep.
and you figure out which chair they are.
Yes.
Do you have to survey them to know which chair they're in?
Uh, yes, I would say
It's
yes.
helpful. Yeah.
There are people who say, well, I kind of just know. I found out you don't know.
Yeah.
I found out very many times.
When we did the actual surveys, and much to our surprise, and I was talking with one of our adult leaders that's been discipling one of these guys. So he grew up in the church, like is very vocal, like during our small group times.
Yep.
And he indicated that he was in chair 1.
Yeah.
And we were like, what? We would have totally like
Yep.
had you in a different category as far like just his knowledge. And,
Yep.
and he's just like, yeah, like I know a lot, but I wasn't. And he, he gave his life to Christ actually in this past year.
Yeah.
And has been like sharing the gospel. Like, I mean, he rapidly changed into different chairs, but
Yes.
he, we would have misjudged it
Yeah.
if we didn't actually ask him some tough questions about what he believes and where he's at.
Yeah, so the 4-chair surveys, you can find that in Dan Spader's book, 4-Chair Discipling. Highly recommend it. We get nothing from offering that book, but
Yet. This is not a sponsor of this
Yes.
podcast yet.
But also too, you can it's sponsored by Like Jesus Ministries, so you can go on to Like Jesus Ministries, and you can look at. They also have an app. There's an app for that. You can look in that, and they also have it available digitally where you can have your students join. So that's another way you can do that. But just a self-assessed survey, walking through the different challenges, and we don't give name tags. We don't say, wow, look at all our chair 4s.
You don't get a certain amount of stars, gold
correct.
stars if you're
Yeah.
chair 4.
No, it's just for us to know, and then we kind of keep that information. But it's helpful to know what your average, score is, so you know the average kid in the room where they're at. But also too, it's if you've got a large group, if you have 100 kids and you have 5 in chair 1, it's like, hey, we need to go back and we need to be more outreach focused. And
Well, what I found was like you think you know your audience, you're just based on like where you think they are. And when we first started doing the 4-chair surveys, it was really interesting because I thought that most of them were like in mature category, like a chair 3. And when we did the surveys, there was like I think it was something like 56% were in chair 2.
yeah. First time we did 57% were in chair 1. And I would have told you
Yeah.
most kids are probably chair 3.
Yeah. Well, and so just to realize like, whoa, there's a big gap on what I thought. And so that changed what I was teaching.
Absolutely.
I was like, so if we're trying to get students from chair 2 to chair 3 now, like it's a big difference in what I talk on, what I emphasize, what I sermon series that I go through. So with that, there's definitely a way to adjust your teaching and your focus on your programs if you know where your students are. So I'd say the 4 things that we mentioned: new conversion growth, gospel conversations, baptisms, and 4-chair scores. There's ways to track those easily. And I would say just a prerequisite, because we've seen different people ask this like genuinely, but also like ask this skeptically. Is that a word? Skeptic. Okay. Sounded weird when I said it. So skeptically, that we shouldn't judge where students are spiritually. So this leads us to our rapid fire question. Isn't it legalistic to measure kingdom success or measure spiritual growth or measure, how many students are coming to Christ? Or what would you say to that?
If it was, then the book of Acts has it wrong. About 3,000 were added to their numbers daily. You even look in the Gospels, the feeding of the 5,000. Well, that's really ridiculous that they put a number on how many people were there. We see that Jesus knew how many disciples he had. He had 120, and from that he chose 12. And when you see in the Acts 1:8, take the gospel to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth, we see that in Jerusalem the 3,000 joined daily. Well, I would say most of Jerusalem at that point had heard the gospel. Then it says that they heard that the gospel went to Samaria, so then they went to Samaria. Same thing in Judea. They heard the gospel went to all Judea, so they went to the outer regions. And then in Acts, I believe 17, when Paul is in Thessalonica, they complain about them saying, these are the men who have turned the world upside down. And so you see throughout Scripture that there was a strategy behind why they were doing what they were doing. Now, we have the benefit of having technology, which allows us to kind of keep track of these things, a lot more. So it's not, again, it's between them and God. We can't judge the heart. But at the same time, I would say if we are not measuring success, then I would say we're probably not doing a great job of actually making disciples because what you measure is what you focus on.
And I think you can get into legalism.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. Let me backtrack that. So legalism, by definition, is basically trying to like earn your salvation. Like
Correct.
where you're like,
We're
you think
adding
God is
something.
going to be pleased based on our performance, and we're adding stuff to the gospel. And I would say no, like we're being stewards and we're being strategic.
We're being what?
Stewards.
There you go.
What did I say?
Stewards.
Stewards.
There you go.
Stewards of God's gifts and the ability like to be more effective.
Mm-hmm.
If I would say like right now there's a huge emphasis in evangelical Christianity right now in the Western world of reaching unreached people groups.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, I might be on the, more centered on this now, because of the church that I attend, David Platt is our pastor. And so with that, we have a strategic focus on reaching unreached people groups because they don't have access to the gospel. And so if there wasn't any evaluation of, hey, are we being effective at reaching people that have never heard the gospel or don't have access? Like, cause we're spending a lot of money on missions collectively. And when I say we, like the church, like the global church is spending a lot of money on missions, but we're finding, because we've evaluated some of that, a lot of that is going to already reach people.
Yep.
And so we're like, if we're not strategic about like really focusing our efforts on populations of people that have never heard the gospel, they don't have the Bible in their language, they don't have, then, so I would say like, we have to just be careful about, underestimating data.
Yeah.
Where we're just like, we're not even evaluating anything, and we just hope that we're doing okay. Like, of course, the Lord is giving us technology and giving us the brains and the research to actually be more effective.
And I think most people who respond to the fact that, tracking kingdom success, again, we're realistic. We don't know everything. Yeah. But at the same time, I think it's actually an insecurity of, if we were to track it, I don't know how we do, because it's the amount of people in the room. People loved
the vibe.
Yes, people loved the vibe.
The vibe in the room was amazing.
It's just like,
how do you measure that?
We're growing, and it's like, again, none of those are bad things. Yeah. But at the end of the day, but did you make disciples? And that's kind of the big thing is, I think it comes from a place of insecurity. It's like,
that's what we should put on a shirt.
Our next youth leader shirt's on the back say, but did you make disciples?
Did you make disciples? Yeah.
And so I think it's oftentimes it's the accusation that it's legalistic is like, hey, we want to be diligent in knowing if we made disciples or not. And if I get to, maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe I'll stand before Jesus one day and he's like, I can't believe you did this. But at the same time, when I see his lasting mandates, it's like, I think this is what we should be doing.
I think we should just be good stewards.
There you go.
Stewards. Okay, so this leads us to our next question: is how often and how do you track data in your youth ministry? So, I mean, is this one thing where it's like you just guess that this is happening? Like, I mean, in other words, like, are you tracking it every time you meet? Are you like, how many people moved up a chair this week, or how many people came to Christ this? Like, what are you tracking and how frequently? Just so that we can give people that maybe are just starting off with this idea of tracking these metrics. Yeah. Tell us what you're doing. I'll share what we're doing. I think it's pretty similar, but just practically speaking.
So Gospel Conversations, they have an opportunity at every program for themselves personally to contribute to that. Again, for us, that's ping-pong balls and a cross, but it could be whatever. And that's something that you need to have every time you meet. So it's not like, how many times did you share the gospel in the past month? Because that's not going to be super accurate. So some things that would be, every time we meet, but at the same time, those are only being counted once a month. So once a month, because if you go a quarter and then you're like, hey guys, our goal is 2,000. Over the past 3 months, we shared the gospel, 150 times. It's like, hey, again, that's not like,
keep it top of
it's
mind.
not a failure, but at the same time, we can course correct a lot quicker if we're doing that monthly. And that's the same thing with salvations. Like, every time somebody gets saved, hey, we use an orange ping pong ball to denote that by dropping that in the cross, and so we know that. Baptisms, of course, however often we have baptisms, we're keeping track of how many students got baptized, and if you have like an online database where people sign up for that, you can even go back and say, oh, okay. And then 4 chair scores we do once a quarter, and which I will say this. You get to a point where you have so many kids where you cannot do 4 chair surveys altogether. Because we did it this last time, and we had a pretty full room, and it was like, all right, hey, we're all gonna be quiet. It's like kind of a time focus, and it just didn't work. And so that was like the one learning lesson. It's like, okay, in the future we're gonna split them when we do.
So how are you doing that? Like practically? So papers,
old school paper and pen.
So you print them out,
yes,
and then you have them fill out with a pen, and then you collect them while they're there. So you don't it's not like a
Correct.
take-home test.
Correct.
It's not an open book test.
Yeah.
So they fill them out during a designated time in your youth ministry program once a quarter.
Yep.
And then you collect those papers, and then what?
Yes. So stay with me for this one. Okay. Like Jesus Ministry has an app, and they actually have the survey digitally. So your kids can go on and take the survey digitally. And what it will allow you to do is, if you are made a leader.
Why don't you just have everybody take it digitally?
Yes. Great question.
That's why I wanted to ask.
A lot of kids,
I know the answer.
Yes. A lot of kids don't have phones. And so that creates a nightmare. We in the past, we did it digitally. The kids have to download the app, and I mean, again, it works really well if you can make it work really well. But to us, it was like, hey, let's just have them do it paper style. And then what I do is I go on my own app personally, I put in their score, and then I can see my own score. So then I just say, oh, well, this student did this. I put in their answers. This is what it tells me. So it literally tells me what scores. And then I just enter that in as a data point. And so to me, it doesn't take long to do it. And it allows me they score it for you. And I mean, you kind of get a feel for it depending on how they do it.
It's good.
But yeah, that's how I do it. And I subscribe to Like Jesus. So I'm not just.
So you have to pay for it.
Well, I pay for it because I want to honor them for the work that they're doing. Yeah. So yeah. But
how much is it? Because I'm not part of this. I haven't paid for it, but I haven't used the app.
Correct. It's by the amount of users. It's not super expensive for what it is. Off the top of my head, I don't even realize.
We're talking like $500 a month. About $10 a month.
We're talking. I think the bare minimum is like $10 a month.
Okay. Yeah,
so
yeah. I just wanted to get a range so that people are like, that's
because
unobtainable versus like
because a worker is worthy of their hire. Yeah. We pay to have access to that, but at the same time, you can create your own.
Yeah. And just for reference, I don't pay for the service.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of doing it just to make it easier so I can track it better digitally. But the way we've done it is we've printed off the surveys. We've never had a good success rate with 100% of digital because of devices and stuff. So what we do is we have them fill it out on paper, and then we track the data. We just put it into a spreadsheet. Yeah. And it's like more work. But I'm thinking about going your route and doing the app so that it's it's already in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay. And then, so gospel conversations you track weekly through ping-pong-balls. And then 4 chair scores you track quarterly through paper surveys.
Yep.
New conversion growth.
Yeah. So we
that's just kind of like you go through, like you're keeping track of new students. Cause I've seen you posted, if you follow Ryne on social media, he'll occasionally just kind of post like as like a banner of just victory for the Lord. Like, these are some of the stats that we're seeing in our youth ministry.
Yeah. We post monthly how many decisions we had for Christ. New conversion growth. There again, we want to be clear too. So last year we had past 12 months we had 82 decisions for Christ, but at the same time, not all of those are regular attendees, and so new conversion growth we kind of went with like, hey, who are the kids who are regularly kind of coming to program, not somebody who trusted Christ. We only ever saw him once. That's a win, if they really meant it. But at the same time, we kind of go with like our regular students because we have kids leading their parents to Christ, and it's like so we count that as a salvation, but that doesn't go into the new conversion growth.
And then baptisms, that's a lot easier to track as far as because you like you're present when they are getting baptized, and it's a lot easier to kind of see visually.
Yep.
Okay, so we've talked about how often do you track data in your youth ministry. We talked about legalism when it comes to measuring success in this way.
Yep.
But let's get into some 1-minute questions.
Yes, sir.
And if you've been paying attention to the past couple episodes, you are asking me about something that I love to talk about. It's hard for me to narrow down 1 minute. I love missionary biographies. So
all 4 of Keith's sons
all 4 of my boys are named after historical Christian figures or missionaries.
And so one of your boys.
One of them is this one that we're going to talk about.
Yes. So Keith, who is Dawson Trotman?
So Dawson Trotman was he was a Christian leader that started the Navigators ministry, and he started basically one-on-one discipleship. He created the topical memory system as a way for people to grow in discipleship as new believers, and that started when he had led someone to the Lord he was a hitchhiker. He had picked up a hitchhiker, led him to the Lord, and then he was going down the road about a year later and accidentally picked up the same guy, like not realizing it was him. And the guy started cursing and just saying how, he was sharing immoral stories about his life. And he's like, wait a second, I know you. He's like, I led you to the Lord last year. And the guy goes, oh, yeah, I remember that too. And he was very convicted. He's like, well, you didn't like grow in your faith. And so he made it his mission to train people how to memorize scripture and to know and grow in discipleship. He ended up being on charge of discipleship for Billy Graham in his crusades, and he died at an early age saving a girl from drowning. And Billy Graham did his eulogy.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the eulogy is like one of my favorite things. I mean, one of the best lines. So Billy Graham said that Dawson Trotman died the way he lived, holding others up. So when he drowned, he was actually pushing the girl back up into the boat and drowned. And so yeah, just a really famous line from Billy Graham doing his eulogy was, he died the way that he lived, holding others up. So something cool to be said.
Yeah.
All right. So for you, my friend. Oh yeah. And so my third son, Dawson, is named after Dawson Trotman.
Stay tuned to find out what the other two sons are named after.
Yeah. My oldest is Hudson, which you've covered in a previous episode, and then Dawson.
Yep.
I'm not going to say the other two yet.
They gotta wait.
Ask. Okay. So for you, Ryne.
Yes.
Does someone who commits suicide automatically go to hell?
No. You will not find in Scripture anywhere saying that if somebody takes their own life, that they will lose their salvation. Now, is it a sin to commit suicide? Yes. It's not God's will. And so if somebody's watching this and they're struggling with that, please reach out and get help, because there's hope through the gospel. But no, we will not see that. We will not see any sin that will cause you to lose your salvation. If you are born again, you can't die again. To be born again, 1 Corinthians 5:16, if anybody's in Christ, he is a new creation. And Jesus says that everybody who is in my hand, nobody can be plucked from it. And so we do not believe that somebody who commits suicide goes to hell. Just as we believe that we all still sin once we trust Christ, but at one day we will made with new bodies that are not marred by sinful nature. So no, but again, if you are struggling with that, reach out. There's hope in the gospel. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah. Well, that concludes another episode of Beyond the Youth Room podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. If you are not subscribed to our YouTube channel, we invite you to do that. We notice a lot of people that are viewing our videos are not yet subscribed. So if you are one of those, we invite you to subscribe so that you won't miss a future episode. So see you next time.